The winter of 1885 descended upon the Wyoming Territory with a vengeance, burying the small town of Silver Creek under 3 feet of drifting snow. The wind howled through the valley like a wounded animal, rattling the window panes of the general store where the warmth of a potbelly stove fought a losing battle against the December chill. "Mylin, you're buying ribbon for the Christmas auction?" "Really?" Mylin's delicate hand stilled on the spool of crimson satin. The voice of Mrs. Halloway carried across the dry goods store, sharp and discordant, cutting through the low hum of conversation. It was loud enough for the 3 other women browsing the bolts of calico and wool to hear every syllable. "Yes, Mrs. Halloway," Mylin replied, her voice soft and accented, sounding like water flowing over smooth stones. She kept her gaze lowered, staring at the vibrant red ribbon that contrasted starkly against her pale skin. Her face burned, a flush of heat rising up her neck, but she refused to let her hands tremble. "Well," Mrs. Halloway's laugh was brittle, like ice snapping under a boot heel. "I suppose everyone is entitled to try." Even when she paused, her eye sweeping over Mylin's figure with theatrical concern that masked deep-seated disdain. "Even when the outcome is already clear. One must wonder if the town has a palate for foreign curiosities." The other women tittered behind their gloved hands, their eyes darting toward Mylin with a mixture of amusement and hostility. To them, she was an anomaly, a relic left behind by a husband who had passed too soon. Mylin paid for her ribbon, placing the coins on the counter with deliberate care. The shopkeeper took the money without meeting her eyes. She gathered her small parcel and walked out into the biting December cold. The air smelled of wood smoke and impending snow. She had made it halfway down Main Street, the wooden boardwalk slick with frost, when she heard a cry. A little girl, perhaps 6 years old with flaxen hair peeking out from a woolen bonnet, stood frozen near the muddy ruts of the road. She was staring at a scattering of peppermint sticks and ribbons she had dropped in the slush. Her mother was already 10 paces ahead, her breath puffing in the air, her voice sharp with impatience. "Sarah! Pick those up this instant. Do you know what sugar costs?" Mylin knelt, the movement fluid despite the biting cold. "It is not easy to hold so many things with small mittens," she said gently. She gathered the ribbons and the candy, wiping the mud carefully from the wrappers with her own handkerchief. She pressed them into the girl's small, gloved hands. "There you are, little one. Good as new." The girl, Sarah, looked up, her eyes wide and blue. She stared at Mylin, at the almond shape of her eyes, the raven-black hair pulled back smoothly. "Thank you," she whispered. "Sarah." The mother turned back, her face twisting when she saw who was near her daughter. She rushed forward, grabbing the child's arm and pulling her away roughly, as if Mylin carried a plague. She didn't say a word to Mylin, didn't offer a nod of thanks. She simply glared, a look of protective disgust, and dragged her daughter toward the mercantile. Mylin stood slowly, her knees aching from the cold. She brushed the slush from her skirt and continued home. She didn't make it far before she heard them. 3 young cowboys lounged outside the Rusty Spur Saloon, whiskey brave and bored, their breath misting in the frigid air. The tallest one, a man named Brody, called out as she passed. "Hey, Mrs. My. Heard you're making a basket for tonight." Mylin kept walking, her eyes fixed on the horizon where the grey sky met the white peaks. "Don't waste your time," another one laughed, leaning back against a hitching post. "Ain't nobody bidding on a basket that comes with chopsticks." Their laughter followed her all the way to the edge of town, haunting her steps like a pack of wolves. Her cabin sat at the very end of a dirt road, isolated and small, tidy in the way things become when they are all you have left to care for. It was the home Jacob had built for her. Mylin closed the heavy oak door and leaned against it, breathing hard. She made it to the rough-hewn table before the tears finally came. They weren't loud. She had learned not to cry loudly 2 years ago when Jacob died of fever, and the world decided she no longer mattered. The question burned in her chest, hot and suffocating. "Why did you leave me here, Jacob? Why did you bring me to this land of snow and stone only to leave me alone?" She touched the jade bracelet she still wore on her left wrist. Jacob had given it to her on their wedding day. He had been a trapper, a man of the mountains who saw her not as a curiosity, but as a woman. When he looked at her, his eyes had been full of something she couldn't fake, something real and warm. But now, she was just the Chinese widow, the outsider. The woman the town pitted on Sundays and forgot by Monday. My Lin wiped her face with her hands and stood. The basket supplies sat on the counter. Flour, precious sugar, ginger root, and the jar of 5-spice powder she had rationed for months. Jacob loved her cooking. He had told her once that her food could melt the coldest winter. One more time, she whispered to the empty room. I will try one more time. Her hands moved with fierce purpose. She did not make the biscuits and fried chicken the other women would be preparing. She made what she knew, what was true to her. She kneaded the dough for mooncakes, filling them with sweet red bean paste she had prepared days ago. She mixed flour and spices for almond cookies that smelled of home. She steamed delicate buns filled with savory pork and scallions. She worked through the afternoon and into the evening, pouring every ounce of stubborn hope she had left into that basket. If they wouldn't see her worth, maybe they would taste it. By the time she finished, the sun had set, plunging the world into a blue-black darkness. She wrapped everything carefully in a beautiful red silk cloth, tied the ribbon she had bought into a careful, complex knot, and stood back. It was beautiful. It was the best work she had ever done. It wouldn't matter. She knew it wouldn't matter. But she had made it anyway because some part of her, stupid, stubborn, and still breathing, refused to disappear completely. My Lin went to her wardrobe. She bypassed the drab wool dresses the town expected a widow to wear. Instead, she reached for the garment she had been saving. It was a traditional cheongsam, cut from heavy white silk. In her culture, white was the color of mourning, of death and reverence. It was fitting for her heart, even if the town wouldn't understand. The dress was high-collared and embroidered with subtle silver thread that caught the lamplight like frost. She looked at herself in the cracked mirror by the door. She looked like a ghost, or perhaps a spirit of the snow. She was 20 years old, yet she felt 100. She picked up the basket, heavy with hours of work, and walked out into the December night. The town hall blazed with lamplight and laughter. My Lin could hear the music before she even reached the door, fiddles and a honky-tonk piano raising a storm of celebration against the silence of the winter night. She paused at the threshold, taking a breath that stung her lungs. Inside, the heat hit her like a physical wall. The room was decorated with pine boughs and holly. The other women clustered together like birds on a wire, young and lovely in their calicos and ginghams, their baskets decorated with dried flowers and lace. They laughed easily, heads bent together, sharing secrets My Lin would never be invited to hear. When she stepped fully into the light, the conversation near the door died. The white cheongsam glowed under the lanterns. It hugged her frame modestly but with elegance that was alien to Silver Creek. She stood at the edge of the room, alone with her basket. Nobody looked her in the eye. Nobody spoke. The auction would start soon. The humiliation would follow. But My Lin stayed anyway, her back straight, her chin held high. Leaving would have been the same as agreeing with every cruel thing they had ever whispered about her. And she wasn't ready to do that. Not yet. The auctioneer, a portly man named Mr. Abernathy, climbed onto the stage. His voice boomed across the hall, jovial and commanding. All right, folks. Settle down. It's time for the main event. Let's see how generous our bachelors are feeling this chilly evening. The crowd cheered. The process began. Next basket. Miss Emily Tate's. Beautiful work here, folks. Smells like apple pie. Let's start at $3. Hand shot up. The bidding climbed fast. 5. 7. 9. A young deputy won at $12, and Emily practically floated to his side, blushing and perfect. My Lin watched from her corner. Her basket sat at her feet, growing heavier with every passing minute. For more baskets sold. Each one brought laughter, applause, and the sweet victory of being chosen. The room hummed with warmth and Christmas cheer, and the kind of belonging my Lynn had forgotten existed. Then, Mr. Abernathy lifted her basket. The room didn't go quiet. That would have been a mercy. Instead, the conversations continued as if he hadn't spoken at all. Mrs. My Lynn's basket, he held it high. The red silk wrapping was distinctive, exotic. Fine work here. Let's start it at, shall we say, $2. Silence. Not the expectant kind. The uncomfortable kind. Mrs. Halloway's voice carried from the front row, pitched just loud enough to be heard over the shuffling of feet. Probably full of rice and fish heads. Laughter rippled through the room. It wasn't loud, but it was sharp. Mr. Abernathy cleared his throat, looking uncomfortable. $1. More silence. Men studied their boots. Women whispered behind gloved hands. A cowboy near the back muttered to his friend, "I'd have to eat dinner with her." "No thanks. Don't speak the lingo." My Lynn's face burned, her hands clenched at her side so tightly her fingernails dug into her palms. She had known. She had known this would happen, but knowing hadn't prepared her for how it felt, like being slowly erased in front of 50 people who didn't care enough to look away. She felt the tears pricking her eyes and fought them down with everything she had. Mr. Abernathy shifted his weight. "Well, perhaps we'll just move on to $30. The room stopped. The chatter died instantly. Every head turned. A man stood at the very back of the hall, half hidden in the shadow near the heavy oak doors. He was tall, taller than anyone else in the room. He wore a heavy sheepskin coat that had seen better days, and a black Stetson pulled low. When he stepped forward, the lamplight revealed a weathered face, broad shoulders, and serious dark eyes that swept the crowd with the kind of calm that came from never needing to prove anything. My Lynn's breath caught. It was the man from the ridge. 3 months ago, in late September, she had been gathering herbs near the timberline when she had found him. He had been thrown from his horse, his leg twisted at a sickening angle, shivering from shock. She had set the bone right there on the rocks, ignoring his groans of pain, and had supported him all the way back to his remote ranch house. She had visited him for 3 days, applying poultices of ancient herbs to keep the infection out, until he was strong enough to stand. He had barely spoken then, just watched her with intense, fever-bright eyes. And now he was here. Ethan Blackwood. The lone rancher. Mr. Abernathy stammered. "That's Mr. Blackwood. That's 3 times tonight's highest bid." "Are you certain?" "I'm certain." Ethan's voice was deep, rolling like thunder in a canyon. He walked forward slowly, deliberately, his boots heavy on the wooden floor. "Mrs. My Lynn made that basket. I can tell by the care in it." He reached the front, pulled a roll of banknotes from his pocket, and counted it out. It was more money than most families in town saw in 2 months. Mrs. Halloway found her voice first. "Mr. Blackwood, surely you didn't see whose basket it was." "It's the foreign woman's." "I saw exactly whose it was." Ethan turned, his dark eyes meeting Mrs. Halloway's with a look that made her recoil. Then, he looked at My Lynn. $30. That's my bid." He picked up the basket, handling the red silk with surprising gentleness. Then he did something that made the entire room gasp. He walked over to My Lynn and offered her his arm, bowing slightly at the waist. "Mrs. My Lynn, would you do me the honor of sharing this meal with me?" My Lynn couldn't speak. She couldn't breathe. She could only nod. She placed her hand on his forearm. The wool of his coat was rough against her silk sleeve. The room watched in stunned, gaping silence as they walked together to a small table in the corner, away from the prying eyes. Ethan pulled out her chair for her, a courtesy no man in this town had ever shown her. He unpacked the basket with careful hands. He lifted the lid of the container, and the scent of anise, ginger, and savory